Good evening and welcome to Primetime Lawmakers for February 15, 2011, the 14th legislative day of the 2011 session of the Georgia General Assembly. I'm Scott Slade. Coming up in tonight's program, a bill requiring legal status verification for students attending state colleges and universities passes a House committee. The Senate passes a resolution calling on the Department of Transportation to update its winter weather response plan. We continue our leadership interview series tonight. Labor Commissioner Mark Butler will join us, and the budget's on our minds. I'll be joined in studio by Senate Appropriations Chairman Jack Hill and House Appropriations Secretary Doug Collins. It's an awful lot to do for you this evening, all that's coming up in Primetime Lawmakers. But first, a House committee votes to bar undocumented immigrants from the state's colleges or universities. Mwandi Lawson is live at the Capitol with that story. Good evening, Mwandi.
Good evening, Scott. The Higher Education Committee this afternoon gave approval to House Bill 59. That measure would add higher education to the list of public benefits like Medicaid or food stamps, for which the state requires an applicant to prove lawful presence in the United States. Bill sponsor Tom Rice told the committee, quote, "Those people who are here legally are very, very welcome."
House Bill 59, though, deals with the issue of those who are not here legally. And it's brought to us basically because of the issue that came up last summer with regard to the Kennesaw State University student who was and is a member of the enrolled in the university system and was found via a police stop to not possess documentation indicating that she was here legally. And that brings the issue up of should public benefit, such as the dollars that are spent to provide seats in classrooms for Georgia students, be available to those who are here illegally. And the answer to that, in my estimation, as with every other public benefit that we have, with the exception of K-12 education and health needs, is no.
It was notable that although HB 59 was receiving a hearing by a House committee today, both the Senate Majority Leader Chip Rogers and the Senate Rules Chairman Don Balfour testified in favor of the measure. One voice of dissent came from Errol Davis, Chancellor of the state's university system. He said the Board of Regents is not in the business of immigration.
Our capacity is not being stressed by thousands of illegal students. Of the 311,000 students in our 35 degree granting institutions and universities last fall, we found 501 undocumented students, or less than 0.2% of our student body. These 501 students all pay out-of-state tuition, which we didn't want to divulge, but did. Now, the fact that it more than covers the cost of their education.
HB 59 cleared the House Higher Education Committee on its way to House Rules. In the Senate today, passage of a resolution urging the Department of Transportation to create a network of contractors to assist with weather emergencies like that snowstorm at the beginning of the legislative session.
Department employees totaled some 70,000 hours of work, and the department spent $5.5 million to help clear the snow and ice from the roads on some 15,000 miles of federal and state highways. However, the Georgia DOT does not have enough equipment and the personnel to efficiently clear the roads quick enough.
Senate Resolutions 30 and 31 both passed the Senate without opposition and moved to the House. The Senate also agreed with the House that the families of state employees killed in the line of duty should be entitled to their benefits. Senator Johnny Grant presented House Bill 107.
The most important part of this language of this change is on lines 31 and 32, where it sets that rate that the deceased spouse or the family of the deceased state employee would be able to continue that coverage at the state employee rate.
HB 107 passed the Senate by a vote of 54-0. Changes made by Senate committee send that measure back to the House. The Senate Education and Youth Committee this afternoon approved two bills that could pave the way for charter schools to join students at local actually to join teams at their local area public schools. The Georgia High School Association testified that students should play on the team where they earn their grades. Still, Senate Bills 34 and 55 easily cleared committee and head to Senate rules. In other news, Senator Barry Loudermilk began the day with the announcement of the introduction of legislation that would ban abortion. Referring to the preamble of the Declaration of Independence, Senator Loudermilk said that Senate Resolution 153 protects rights guaranteed to all Americans.
This would simply define a person as a human being, irrespective of age, race, sex, health, function, condition of dependency, including unborn children at every stage of their biological development.
According to Georgia Right to Life, all 9 of the state's constitutional officers and a majority of Georgia residents support a human life amendment.
Chief Justice Blackmun, when Roe v. Wade was decided, made this statement that if the personhood of the fetus could ever be determined, then certainly the case, referring to Roe v. Wade, would fall apart because the fetus would be, the preborn baby would be protected by the 14th Amendment. So when you talk about legislation that deals with the personhood of the preborn, you're dealing with the fundamental, most important issue regarding the right of that child in his mother's womb.
Senator Judson Hill sponsors SB 26 to prohibit state funding for abortion.
Many in this state say it's wrong at the federal level to use our taxpayer dollars to fund abortions, and it's wrong at the state level to use state taxpayer dollars to fund abortions under Obamacare.
SR 153 will be assigned to committee tomorrow. Back over on the House side, Representative Edward Lindsey led the passage of House Bill 46 today. That's the Uniform Interstate Depositions and Discovery Act.
What its purpose is simply this. Number one, to reduce the legal costs of litigating, for litigants rather, including Georgia litigants, who are required to travel out of state to conduct discovery for their lawsuits. That's number one. Number two, what this bill does, and I think this is very important for folks who are in this state, is that it protects Georgia residents against whom discovery is sought by requiring that any dispute over the scope of discovery be heard in the Georgia resident's home county. In other words, it keeps them from having to go out of state to fight a subpoena or go out of state to fight a discovery request that they feel is unfair.
It's notable Representative Mike Jacobs is actually the lead sponsor of HB 46, but as his wife had a baby over the weekend, he was not on the floor today. That measure passed 161-0 and moves over to the Senate. A subcommittee of the House Life and Health Committee today approved a bill that would allow Georgians to purchase health insurance plans approved in other states. Representative Matt Ramsey sponsors House Bill 47.
This is in the individual market where this will be effective, which only 5% of our state buys insurance in the individual market, but it's a critical segment of our market because the 18% that are uninsured, they don't have access to health insurance through their employer or through a group plan because they would already have insurance. So when they go to buy insurance, this is the only place they have to turn. And the thrust of this effort is to give those individuals and small businesses and families a greater range of options, so they'll hopefully be able to access insurance when under the current set of laws and regulations we have in Georgia, they don't have insurance.
HB 47 will now be considered by the full House Life and Health Committee. There was widespread panic in both the House and the Senate this morning, but not to worry. Both chambers actually were honoring that Athens ban. It got its start in a dorm room at the University of Georgia 25 years ago.
This group has fans that follow them around on all these concert tours. In fact, we've got a couple of them here today, even Dave Pratt, who has been to 184 widespread panic shows, and my friend Stephen Covington from Athens has been to 182. He says he's going to catch Dave before the year's over if he can. That's the type of loyal fan base they have.
Well, it goes without saying, we are fully whelmed to be here. We always like trying new things, and this is definitely one of those things. May your wishes ring true, even those left unprayed.
And it's certainly not every day that the House gets a serenade like that. And it's also not every day that a Georgian receives the nation's highest civilian honor. Tributes in both the House and the Senate today for Congressman John Lewis, who was at the White House today to receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
having been able to serve in this House for 37 years, I stand and others stand on the shoulders of men of courage, men and women of courage like John Lewis, who is an outstanding Georgian and outstanding American.
Our former colleague being our current mayor of this great city, he is in Washington, D.C. to witness Congressman John Lewis get the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
And after receiving that award, Congressman Lewis told reporters he never expected to receive such an honor, especially from a black president. Reporting live from the Capitol, I'm Wandi Lawson for Primetime Lawmakers.
That's a great day. Before you go on, Wandi, back to House Bill 59, the measure aimed at keeping illegal immigrants out of the state's public colleges. You reported the university system is opposed to the bill. I mean, there's nothing else because of the small numbers involved. What is the screening process that Georgia colleges are using now?
Well, they've actually updated those screening processes since October when the Board of Regents met. They actually have begun applying some new rules that require the students to declare their residency status. That's mostly to ensure that they're actually able to receive that in-state tuition. They also say that they verify using several federal systems to make sure that students are legally in this country, and also that the 5 most popular universities, those that have to cap their enrollment, those are closed entirely to undocumented students. So those who can't verify their residency aren't able to go to schools like UGA or to Georgia State.
Appreciate the report, Wandi. Have a good night.
Thanks.
And now to our leadership segment. Strapped with an unemployment rate of over 10%, Georgia's had to take out $620 million in loans from the federal government to continue providing unemployment benefits. And Wandi sat down with Labor Commissioner Mark Butler late last week to learn more about how he's tackling the depleted unemployment trust fund.
Georgia has always done a very good job of managing this trust fund. However, back in 1999, when they decided to do a tax holiday, which took about $1 billion out of the trust fund, which at the time seemed like a very good policy decision. However, we're finding out now, of course, everybody says, well, hindsight's 20/20, how could you see this? And of course, you could not have seen this coming. Had we have not have had that tax holiday back then, we would be in the black, so to say. We would have over $500 million in our trust fund right now, and we would be one of the very few states that did not have to borrow money. However, that didn't happen. There's nothing we can do about it now, so we have to do the best job we can to get through this. And what we're trying to do is balance the solutions with the impact on Georgia businesses, because that's who's impacted.
So when money has to be borrowed from the federal government, how does that adversely affect the businesses here in the state?
Well, I'll try to make this, it's actually a very complicated formula, because you're talking about the trust fund, which is managed by the state, and we pay the initial claims out, and once we use up all that money, we have to borrow from the federal government. Now, there's interest we have to pay on that, which so far we haven't had to pay, but starting as of January, the clock is ticking, and we do have to pay interest on the money we have borrowed. The longer it takes us to pay back the principal, however, the federal government can take on their side of unemployment tax, which some people you may have heard say the term FUTA, they can actually increase and will increase their tax in order to get the money paid back quicker. So it behooves us to get it paid back as quickly as possible to keep the federal taxes low also. And so that's how it can impact Georgia's businesses.
You sit at a very unique vantage point, having served in the General Assembly and now in your current post. I'm wondering, what ways do you see the General Assembly being able to contribute to some of these solutions?
Well, and that goes to one of the other solutions that we have been working on, kind of behind the scenes, doing some investigating on and working with the Attorney General's office, working with Sam Olens, and also some members of the General Assembly and the governor's staff, is the possibility of being able to bond the money that we owe for the trust fund, which it's a very complicated legal situation. And so we've actually asked the Attorney General's office to take a look at that and possibly give us an opinion, because everybody knows, and we've heard this said many, many times in General Assembly, we cannot borrow money except for capital projects, and that is true. However, the trust fund is a little bit different in the case of the fact that we do borrow money for it. We're borrowing it right now, and if there's any possible way that we can legally do it, it will be a fantastic deal for the state of Georgia and for the businesses of the state of Georgia, because the interest rate in which we can borrow to bond that money is a whole lot cheaper than what the deal that the feds are giving us right now. Their interest rate is almost double of what we could get if we were to bond it.
Considering the high unemployment rate here in the state for many, many years now over the national average, what are some of the first steps that you're taking to tackle this very substantial problem here in the state?
Well, surprisingly, we're seeing some movement in the manufacturing arena, especially in the skilled labor, welders, electricians, along that, but also obviously healthcare is leading the way. Still a lot of interest in there, and so, with those kind of things in mind, one of our natural partners, one that we've had good successes with in the past, and hopefully we're going to have even greater successes in the future, is going to be our technical school system to develop programs. And what we want to do is, going forward, we want to be able to take a look at the needs of Georgia and compile data in partnership with the technical school system to take a look at their programs, their education programs, what they're concentrating in, and then what the needs are, and making sure that we're educating our workforce for the skills that are needed and not just offering a program for the sake of doing it. And we've already opened up talks to start sharing data, which is something that seems like it should have already been done, but a lot of times, you find out in government, everybody tends to want to kind of exist in their own silo, and they have their own little universe and they don't like reaching out. But what we're doing right now in several areas, reaching out to several other agencies to share data, to share information, so that way we can improve our workforce. We did have a very successful program, Georgia Works. It had been expanded, but unfortunately it had become too big of a success, and we financially could not sustain it at the level at which we had expanded to, so we had to take it back to its original intent. But we want to go back and look at that program in this next budget year and see what we can do to enhance that, to make it better, and also to make sure it's properly funded.
What kind of discussions are going on about how resources perhaps can be shared?
Well, that's where reaching out to the business community really makes a huge impact right now, because you're right, we do have a lot of serious budget cuts. We don't have as much money available and much resources available as we have in the past. So we're actually looking at some programs along with several other agencies right now that are just kind of in the planning stage, or we're just the talking about stage, as I like to say, where it won't be just agencies, but we're going to reach out to the business community to find some partnerships, true public-private partnerships, and it'll be training programs that will help a lot of our kids in our high schools, kids that are just looking to go into the workforce, especially kids that kind of in that demographic where they may fall through the cracks. The ones that we tend to have to worry about that may not be getting the attention they need, and develop some not only skill training but some mentoring to help them along, to teach them some life skills, and all that goes toward building a better workforce. A lot of times some people just need a little bit of help with some direction to kind of show them that there is a lot of opportunity out there for them. However, you've got to put forth the effort, and we have a lot of programs that we're looking at right now that hopefully will get off the ground sooner rather than later.
Mark Butler is the Georgia Department of Labor Commissioner. We thank you so much for your time here on Primetime Lawmakers.
Commissioner Mark Butler previously served 8 years in the House of Representatives, District 18. There's much more to come tonight of Primetime Lawmakers. After this short break, we'll be talking budget with Senator Jack Hill, Chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee, and Representative Doug Collins, Secretary of the House Appropriations Committee. We're following the money. Stay with us. Welcome back to Primetime Lawmakers. On Thursday, the House passed the FY 2011 amended budget, the bill that adjusts the budget for the current fiscal year based on actual revenue. $1 million of spending was added to the bill, including $31 million of funding to fill the gap in the Hope Scholarship Fund. The amended budget bill now moves over to the Senate, where it will go through the committee process before being taken up by the full body. And to talk budget matters, I'm joined live in studio tonight by Senate Appropriations Chairman Jack Hill and House Appropriations Secretary Doug Collins. Thank you both for being here. And, Senator Hill, it's good to see you again.
Glad to be here.
Representative Collins, great to have you on Primetime Lawmakers this evening. We are talking money, and Senator, I guess you can say the ball is in your court. Can we expect the Senate version of the amended budget to be vastly different from the House version, or are we kind of in line here?
I don't think you'll see any big differences. We're actually having a lot of conversations with the House, both before and after their passage, and there will be very, very few differences, I believe, and we will go through our process this week and come out of committee next Tuesday and on the floor next Thursday.
Representative Collins, is the increased spending in the amended budget a sign of economic recovery, or is it a sign of something going the other way?
Well, I think really you look at it, it's not really a sign of recovery. We're still in that process of really a challenging area budget, but you're looking at taking what is the normal midterm adjustments, moving those out to taking from the reserve fund to fund education adjustments, and also taking out of the Hope Reserve Fund to fund those needs in Hope. So I think it's really a very flat, and actually if you look at it from taking out those normal adjustments, it's actually down approximately about $20 million.
Senator?
Well, it's the growth is encouraging.
Okay.
I think, and we're on track to possibly accumulate $100 to $200 million in reserve by the end of this year. But if you look back last year, the months begin to get a little better at the end of the year, so I think it's going to be difficult to maintain the difference that we've had in the last 2 or 3 months as we move through the rest of the months. But listen, it's certainly better than a free fall we were in a year ago.
Well, that's for sure. I mean, and people need to understand this is the budget that we're operating under now for the rest of this fiscal year. Is one of the headlines inside of this thing the fact that education is fully funded? Did I hear that?
Well, I think what has happened as you come in is the governor has proposed the fully funding of the enrollment growth in the program, and then the things that are coming like that. So we're looking to make that move out. Again, I think it goes back to something that's been discussed earlier by the governor, and that is taking education, making one of those priorities in the budgeting process, along with the core functions, if you would. And I think that's where we're seeing the most, I guess, difference in this budget as opposed to other years.
Mm-hmm.
I think the big result, I believe, out of the amended budget the governor's put together is I don't think any school system is surprised at anything in that budget.
Okay.
And in the past, that's the best surprise is no surprise, and I believe they were ready, and generally speaking across the state, and what I'm hearing from my district is they believe this year is going to be okay for the rest of the way. So that's a good sign.
Does that mean that there'll be no more teacher furloughs for this school year, or do we know that?
Well, that's a local decision, and the governor made that statement, I think, about 12. I think if they already have scheduled them, I would assume they're still on line for furloughs. But hopefully in 12, with the budget we've got proposed in 12, hopefully there won't be any.
Let's talk about the Hope Scholarship and making sure that that's shored up. What's the latest on that?
Well, I think at this point, I think there's one of the things I think is unique, and I think Senator Hill spoke to that just a moment ago. There's a lot of cooperation between the Senate, the House, and the governor's office right now to tackle these big issues. And Hope right now is being discussed. It's being discussed at different avenues. And I think what you're going to be seeing very shortly is a proposal that takes into account not just fixing the immediate hole, if you would, but also looking at it to where it can be a fix that will last, for 10, 15, 20 years down the road, so we're not having to constantly revisit this situation.
Senator, last time you were here, you were hoping the Georgia Lottery would be able to pump a little more money into this thing. In fact, you called on them to say, come on, let's push some more in there. What's your thinking on that now?
I think everybody needs to share the pain. I think that as we look at the way the lottery funds are divided and the amount we pay for different expenses and things like bonuses, I think everybody needs to be coming to the table and sharing some pain. I'm still convinced that our lottery is underperforming compared to other lotteries. Obviously, the lottery board doesn't agree with that, but I think you'll see in the plan that the governor and the leadership of the House and Senate are putting together a pretty much sharing of the pain and trying to put the Hope Scholarship first and foremost.
Representative Stevens, I believe it is, came up with an idea. He'd like to see some of these special entertainment districts expanded. They would include video lottery terminals outside of the underground Atlanta area, which is where they could be allowed by law now. Places like Jekyll Island, Savannah, even Lake Lanier. What's your attitude on expanding the purview of the lottery so they can take in more revenue with things like video lottery terminals?
Well, I think at this point, I know from the House perspective, and I know from even the governor's own statement, there's not a desire to expand the gambling operations at this point. I think that would be met with some opposition on both sides for various reasons. And I think some of the issues that surrounded Representative Stevens' attempt is things that need to be looked at. We're getting a lot of suggestions right now, and I think that's it's a positive aspect. But I think some of those aspects is as far as taking from statements that have been made, is expansion of that right now a good thing? I'm not so sure that that would be.
Those kinds of things are drastic. I think need some study, and I don't, who knows where we'll be a year from now. But I think we need to take a year and study those kinds of things.
Refresh me on how the funds are being made up now, the shortfall in the Hope Scholarship particularly.
Well, this year the governor basically in 11 it's basically coming out of reserves. It's about $250 million coming out of reserves. For 12, the governor has only appropriated the funds that we expect to receive from the lottery, which is, I think, total somewhere around $832 million. So that's a gap there of $320 million or so, and that's got to be made up in cuts to programs.
The next budget, well, I guess with what is called the big budget, now that we got the amended budget more or less, on the table and ready to move forward, and there's a little bit of good news in there. How bad might things get for the big budget? What are you hearing, especially about revenue?
Well, the governor has a fairly optimistic revenue prediction of 6% or so in the 12 budget, which I think standing here today in February looks pretty good. I think we've got a great chance to make that revenue estimate. There's generally about a 7% cut to agencies, and education's a little over 1%. Regents, obviously, who have other options like tuition, have been cut, around 20%, and around depending on how you figure it, 10 and 20%, and then technical schools about the same. So there will obviously be a tuition increase, but I think Governor Deal did a great job of balancing the needs. And frankly, I heard a department head say the other day, we were prepared for 10% cut, and we actually got a 7 or 8, and he was happy about it. He didn't know that I heard him say that.
Is that called underselling or overselling? I don't know.
I went back and reminded him he shouldn't be out in the hall saying things like that.
Is the typical Georgian going to feel this? I mean, how will that come home to the typical Georgian here in the next year and a half?
Well, I think it's going to be an obvious kind of thing I think when you look at it from the budget perspective, and one of the things that's discussed is, yes, there is a revenue estimate. It is showing improvement in our state, which we were pleased to have. I think the other issue, though, is the fact that we are losing federal monies that had been supplementing in the budget that we're having to now replace. So some of this new money that is coming back in, or the growth that we're seeing, is having to go back and sort of backfill those areas and making decisions on what we need to fill. I think the average Georgian looking at this budget will see a much leaner government. They've been seeing that over the past few years. I think they will see it and as we go along in changes to HOPE and changes to the those programs that are surrounding that. So I think those are the areas that they'll see it the most. But from the governor's perspective, and I think from many of the House and Senate members, is what is the government supposed to be doing, and how do we fund those properly, and then beginning to sort of take us away from those areas that we may have gotten into that we really shouldn't be at.
Did the air go out of the room with President Obama's budget announcement that Georgia was going to get $600,000 to study deepening Savannah's harbor?
Well, there certainly weren't any cheers in our side. I think we give our congressional delegation the opportunity to work that process, and hopefully they'll have a good result.
All right. Great to see both of you. Thanks for coming in and
Thank you,
enlightening
Scott.
us. Hope to have you back, because after all, this is how we keep score, isn't it?
It
is about the money. Great to have you in this evening. And that's all the time we have for Primetime Lawmakers this evening. Coming up tomorrow on Lawmakers, Georgia Supreme Court Chief Justice Carol Hunstein will deliver the annual State of the Judiciary address to a joint session of the House and Senate, and that address will be streamed live on gpb.org at 11 a.m. We'll bring you another installment in our Leadership Interviews series. House Speaker David Ralston is scheduled, plus in-depth analysis on important legislative issues and the latest Capitol news. That's tomorrow night at 7. If you'd like to see a repeat of this broadcast, Primetime Lawmakers can be seen at 5:30 tomorrow morning on GPB. Coming up next on GPB, Bert Wolf travels and traditions. Tonight, Bert visits San Francisco. That's next, so stay tuned right here. And that's our broadcast for the 14th Legislative Day of the 2011 session. Thanks to our guests for joining us tonight. Remember, you can watch the State of the Judiciary address live on gpb.org at 11 a.m. tomorrow. For Monty Lawson and the whole Primetime Lawmakers team, I'm Scott Slade. Have a great night.
This is a GPB original production.